The supporters of the Constitution worked for ratification. The supporters of the Constitution made plans to get enough votes in each state convention to ratify the Constitution. Working to get enough votes for the government to improve solutions to problems is called politics. Tactics are ways of trying to solve problems. Political tactics are ways of trying to solve a political problem, which is usually to get enough votes for your side. The people in the favor of the Constitution used 3 different political tactics to get enough votes. In each special state convention to have the Constitution passed, they used these 3 different tactics. First, the supporters of the Constitution used domination wherever they could by controlling the rules for organizing and ratifying conventions. They set up the rules for state conventions in such a way that people opposed to the Constitution would not be able to get their representatives into the convention. Second, the group worked to get the Constitution ratified using debate, trying to convince enough representatives through argument to get a majority to vote in favor of the Constitution. Third, the people in favor of the Constitution used compromise, giving the opposition something they wanted in return for their votes. Sometimes the people supporting the Constitution used all 3 tactics to get enough votes in a state. They were learning how politics work in a democratic system. Domination. The people in favor of the Constitution successfully dominated the ratifying conventions in 4 states. In 3 states of Delaware, New Jersey, and Georgia, they were able to dominate the state convention so well that the opposition had no representatives. Those conventions were held very soon after the Constitution was sent to the states. Either the only representatives who went to those special state conventions were in favor of the Constitution, or the people in favor of the Constitution convinced them all. Although there must have been some people in those 3 states opposed to the Constitution, there were no votes against it at any of those 3 ratifying conventions. In South Carolina, over 3/5 of the voters were opposed to the new Constitution. The people in favor of the Constitution in South Carolina were powerful planters who owned the largest and wealthiest plantations in the country. Those large landowners set up the ratifying convention. They knew that almost all of the small farmers who lived in the frontier were opposed to the new Constitution. The landholders supporting the Constitution dominated the way the ratifying convention was set up, so that there weren't many representatives from the frontier areas. That plan allowed the Constitution to pass in South Carolina by 149 to 73, even though most of the people in South Carolina were opposed to it. Debate. In the other states, the people who were opposed to the new Constitution did get some people to the special conventions. In those states, there were debates over the ideas in the Constitution. A debate is an organized public argument for or against a certain idea. In Pennsylvania, both sides wrote articles in the newspapers trying to convince other people to think the same way they did. Some of the people in favor of the new Constitution, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, wrote a set of articles that were later published as a book called The Federalist. Their arguments in favor of the new Constitution were so well written that many people became convinced that voting to ratify the Constitution was the best thing to do. The essays they wrote in The Federalist are still studied today. In 4 states, the debates convinced enough people to pass the Constitution. Conventions in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maryland voted to approve the Constitution. In New Hampshire, there was a great debate. Many people were opposed to the Constitution because it allowed slavery. After the debate, the New Hampshire Convention voted in favor of the Constitution. Compromise. Many people were against the Constitution because it lacked a Bill of Rights that guaranteed individual rights. As a compromise, the people in favor of the Constitution offered to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution as soon as the government was in operation. In Massachusetts, the group in favor of the new Constitution convinced John Hancock, who had opposed the Constitution, to propose that a Bill of Rights be added to the new Constitution as soon as the new government got started. When Hancock suggested the Bill of Rights during the convention, it was enough to win over a few more votes, and the Constitution passed in Massachusetts by 187 to 168 votes. Many important and famous people in Virginia and New York were opposed to the new Constitution, but in both those states, the group in favor of the Constitution also offered to add the Bill of Rights. That won over enough votes to pass the Constitution. In Virginia, James Madison, one of the writers of the Federalist, agreed to write the Bill of Rights. This figure shows when each state ratified the Constitution. As you can see, the 9th state ratified the Constitution on June 21, 1788. After the 9th state ratified the Constitution, the new government could take effect. 4 days later, probably before word reached them, the representatives in Virginia also approved the new Constitution. New York ratified the Constitution a month later. Even though most people in Virginia and New York opposed the Constitution, the fear of being left out of the Union influenced enough people to decide to ratify the Constitution in those states. Elections for president and representatives of the new Congress were held in the fall of 1788. The first Congress met in New York City in the spring of 1789. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the nation's first president.